The story began on a quiet night after the soccer game. My husband came home, accompanied by two friends whom he did not know. What happened that night would change my perspective forever. In this narrative, we will explore what happened on that evening that left everyone thinking. My husband has always been a quiet person, no fuss, no muss, no fuss. Before I continue, I ask you to give a like to the video and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything and you help me to continue bringing you more stories. Thank you. Let's continue. Someone who chooses a stable life. Our relationship was very close, or so I thought. After so many years, there was never any indication that he was keeping any secrets. Our life was simple. During the day, I went about my chores and my routine. In the evenings, we would get together in harmony. That night, as was customary, my husband went to play soccer. It was his Saturday activity. A time to disconnect and enjoy with his friends. I stayed home. However, when I came back, he was not alone. Adriana and Pablo, two friends I had never seen before, accompanied him. My husband looked happy and introduced them to me while I tried to remember if I had ever mentioned them. No, I never had. They seemed like ordinary people. Friendly even, but something about the atmosphere was striking. I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. It was unusual to have visitors after soccer, so I chose to keep quiet. I greeted everyone and there was a cordial conversation. Then I walked away to continue with my homework. However, I felt a need to stay close, as if I knew that night would be special. The evening began like any other, but what would happen next would not only make me doubt my bond, but also challenge my own decisions. After making some drinks, upon returning to the lounge, my husband radiated a vitality that was hard for me to understand. I thought he was just excited to spend some quality time with Adrian and Pablo. I took a seat next to him on the couch while the three of them joked about soccer. Everything looked normal up to that point. That night lacked any special traits. Occasionally I would chime in with a brief observation. However, I couldn't help noticing something strange. I don't know if it was his attitude or the way he spoke. But something didn't fit. Maybe it was his smile. From time to time his gaze would cross mine, as if he was waiting for something. I decided not to make a big deal out of it. Maybe he was just in a good mood. Everything looked ordinary until my husband's words generated a change in the atmosphere. Without warning, he looked at Pablo, smiled, and said something that generated an instant reaction in me. "Pablo, you know Elena could be a great conversationalist tonight." At that moment, I felt everything stopped. The laughter stopped, the words hung in the air. I was trying to process the information. What had he just said? Was he joking? Why did he say it? I turned my eyes toward my husband, looking for some clue that it was all a joke. Maybe I expected to see him laugh. However, he wore a calm expression, even serene. There was no laughter or rumbling. He was watching me carefully, as if waiting for my response. My eyes fell on my husband's friends, trying to figure out if they were aware of what was going on. Pablo, the man he had addressed, looked completely bewildered. He remained motionless as his glass swung from the table to his lips. Adrian was emotionless, his eyes fixed on the floor. In a matter of seconds, there was a radical change in the atmosphere. The tension was evident and could not be ignored. I couldn't figure out if I was upset, confused, or frightened. My mind was spinning, trying to find a rational explanation for what had just happened. Why did he say it? What does it all mean? Is this a game? What does he expect me to do? Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any stranger, my husband, just as calmly, added something else that ended up disturbing the atmosphere even more. Yes, I'm serious. I experienced a punching sensation in my stomach. This was no joke. There was no hidden agenda. I was carrying on a conversation in all seriousness, and most disturbing of all, I had no idea what it meant. The absence of noise in the room was disturbing. No one dared to say a word. Pablo stood his ground. Adrian kept looking down, and I sat there trying to understand. That night was no longer an ordinary night. What happened after that statement changed the perception I have of my husband, the connection I have with him, and even the way I see myself. However, the evening passed in an unexpected way. He had always shown himself to be reserved, so why was he doing this now? Why was he saying those words in front of two individuals he had barely met? I stared into his eyes, looking for some clue that would help me understand. But he remained impatient, as if everything was under control. For a brief moment I lived in complete solitude, as if I was alone in that place. In my head the ideas were piling up. Is this a practical joke? Is he trying something new? Is he mad at me? What does he expect me to do? My mind was racing, but my body was paralyzed. Part of me longed to get up and run away, to change rooms, to pretend this wasn't happening, to avoid participating in something I didn't understand. Yet there was a small voice in the corner of my thoughts telling me, "Stay here. Watch what happens. Find out the reason behind their actions." My curiosity and my instinct to escape seemed to be in conflict. I decided to watch my husband calmly. He was holding his glass, acting as if he was fully satisfied with the situation. What bothered me most was that he seemed to have full confidence that everything would be fine. As if he knew in advance how the evening would conclude. How could he be so certain? What was he trying to prove? It wasn't just him. The two individuals also caught my attention, looking for some sign that they were equally disoriented. Pablo was holding his ground, as if he hadn't decided whether to laugh or run away. Adrian looked uncomfortable, but something in his attitude gave me the impression that he was looking forward to what would happen next. What were their expectations? What would be the best course of action for me to take? Crossing my arms, I made an effort to remain calm. I didn't plan to give up so easily. I didn't plan to say I felt lost. I decided to keep quiet, acting as if I had no part in the events, as if I was not affected at all. However, the situation inside me was chaotic. Once again, my husband stared at me. This time his expression had experienced a cameo. It was not a distraction. It was not a joke. He gave the impression that he had expectations of me. Something I couldn't quite understand. What was his idea? What were my options? At that moment, the only thing I could understand was that despite my efforts to resist, I was already committed to whatever plan he was hatching. There was no way I could take it back. The questions kept invading my mind. However, it was gradually getting worse. My breathing was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. I wanted solutions, but I didn't dare ask. Then he did something that surprised me even more. My husband stood up slowly, saying nothing, paying no attention to his friends. He simply walked towards me. When he was very close, he leaned over and said something to me in a low voice. Almost inaudible. "Trust me." Those 3 words were enough to stop the flood of thoughts in my head. There was a calmness in his voice, as if he was covertly giving me instructions. At that moment I experienced an incomprehensible mix of emotions. First I thought of telling him to stop playing with me. However, there was a certainty in her gaze that led me to meditate. He had never shown impulsive tendencies before. If he was doing this, there had to be a justification. His words kept echoing in my mind. Trust me. It was difficult. But for some reason I felt I had no choice. It was as if he was conveying that message to me. No matter how strange or annoying all this might be, it had a purpose, though I didn't understand what it was. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Wrapping myself around the back of the couch, I inhaled deeply. I had no intention of running away or attending any longer. I decided to follow his directions, even though I didn't understand what was going on. I was curious to find out how far the situation could go. There was something in me that yearned to trust him. Those 3 expressions had reached a point of no return. I began a process that would change the way I saw my husband and myself. After a long time, I finally felt like I was looking at him from a whole new perspective. Who was this person? He was the one with whom I had shared my life, but now he looked different. There was a sense of protection that I had never experienced before. Something captivating and unsettling at the same time. I decided to stay. Not only to find out his intentions, but to understand who this person was. There were mysteries he had not revealed to me, something I could not let go of. Although anxiety was still present, it was mixed with uncontrollable curiosity. At that moment, I chose to make a decision that would change things. I had crossed a boundary. Everything that happened from that instant on would be irreversible. As the night progressed, everything began to change. My husband, with that unnerving calm, kept expressing uncommon observations. At first, the phrases seemed harmless, but they always contained a duality of meanings that made you question if there was something hidden. Adriana and Pablo, at first stiff and anxious, began to calm down, trying to adapt to an environment that was difficult for them to understand. As for me, I was experiencing a roller coaster of emotions. Uncertainty turned to anxiety, and then a curiosity arose that I couldn't ignore. What is the reason behind all this? What is he looking for? Is he trying something new? Or is he just having fun playing with me? Adrian, the friend who had spoken the least, finally interrupted the stillness with a faint laugh. In my opinion, this situation is a bit awkward, isn't it? Pablo tried to change the subject by mentioning soccer. But my husband stopped him by raising his hand, as if trying to keep control of the conversation. Let's stay on topic, he said with an unfriendly smile. I'd like to talk about a more interesting topic. I want us all to be honest. Once again, silence filled the gravitation. As both friends listened to what he said, they looked at each other clearly uneasy. As I felt my heart begin to beat faster. Really? Was that what I had in mind? What kind of honesty was I looking for? I bit my lip trying to remain calm. But the atmosphere was getting stranger and stranger. It felt like we were participating in some kind of social experiment. A game in which only my husband could participate. Tell me, Pablo. My husband continued, turning his attention to him. What did you think about meeting Helena for the first time tonight? Pablo latched onto his drink, clearly surprised by the question. She looked at my husband, then at me, and finally at the floor. Are you sure you want me to say it? Compose and placement, she asked with trepidation and confusion. Yes, I want you to be honest, replied my husband calmly as he waited for Paul's response. I felt the tension take hold of my body. Time seemed to stand still. I couldn't believe my husband was interrogating his friends like that. I was sure that any answer would disturb the atmosphere of the evening. After taking a deep breath, Paul said, I thought she was a really beautiful woman. His tone of voice denoted insecurity, as if he was waiting for a reprimand. My husband nodded his head as if he had foreseen that answer. Then he looked at Adrian, and you, Adrian? What did you think? Adrian, visibly irritated, tried to smile to lessen the tension of the moment. I think we agree, he said with a shrug. I began to feel a strange sensation inside me. I didn't know if it was embarrassment, discomfort, or something else. Every word was making the atmosphere worse. I wanted to say something, anything, to stop the conversation. But a part of me was still curious. What was my husband's limit? What was he up to with all this? The atmosphere was charged with tension, but what my husband did next completely changed the situation. He rose from his seat and placed his glass on the table with such precision, it seemed premeditated. Silence reigned in the room. Every step he took towards the center echoed like an echo. All eyes were on him. Even I, who had been struggling with my own thoughts. I was unable to take my eyes off him. There was something in his stance, in the way he looked at each of us, that made me realize I was about to make an important decision. I began to feel my heart beating more intensely. A mixture of excitement and fear invaded my thoughts. What message was I about to communicate? "Can I ask you something?" Drania said in a calm and friendly tone. She turned her gaze to Adrian and Pablo. "I need your help tonight. I trust you, just as you trust me." Both individuals looked at him with obvious confusion, trying to understand what they had just heard. Adrian was the first to speak. "Could you explain yourself better?" he ingested nervously. My husband responded with a smile that was beginning to disconcert those around him. A smile that hid more intense emotions. "Tonight there are no disguises, no secrets. I want everyone here to be completely honest, even if it makes them uncomfortable." I felt a tightness in my chest. What did he intend? What did he mean? What did he predict would happen in that place? My mind searched for solutions, but only found more questions. The tension was palpable, like a burden weighing on each of us. I looked from Adrian to Paul, trying to understand their thoughts, but they looked as confused as I was. My husband, as if realizing he needed additional encouragement, turned slightly in my direction. "There's no reason to worry, it's not a rehearsal," he said with a smile. "My only wish is that both Elena and I can count on each other." After saying that, he turned his gaze to me. I felt that something had changed. I was no longer just a bystander. I was now fully involved, even though I didn't know how. At that moment, my husband made the decision that completely changed the way the evening was going. He approached Adrian and said with a calmness that almost made my skin crawl, "Adrian, if you trust me, please come closer to Helena." My eyes opened like saucers. I experienced an increase in my breathing rate. What was I doing? He pondered as Adrian looked at him as if he had asked for something impossible to achieve. Pablo could not hide his nervousness. I myself was torn between doubt and interest. My whole body was on alert, but it was impossible to move or make a sound. The tension was unbearable. Adrian hesitated, looked at my husband and then at me. After taking a deep breath of air, he slowly sat up. He walked over to where I was. But then he paused and looked up at Paul, as if waiting for his approval. My husband kept silent and contemplated the situation with a calm expression, which was beginning to disconcert those around him. He seemed to understand that after all, his requests would be granted. At that moment, I felt that everything was about to explode. Adrian was about to do something that none of us could fully understand. Pablo seemed to be about to intervene, and my husband just watched, as if everything was unfolding exactly as he had foreseen. It was at that instant that I realized that the night was about to reach a point of no return. The atmosphere inside the gravitation was unusual. Adrian had approached me, but decided to stop and ponder the situation. Pablo remained static with his glass in his hand, but his attention was on us. My husband remained steady and calm, as if he knew what would happen next. The atmosphere was so charged. My breathing was heavy. Then my husband approached, and with the calm he had demonstrated throughout the evening, he said something that made it clear that the situation exceeded our expectations. "Tonight doesn't just involve words. The key is in trust, in letting go of our fears and exploring something we would not normally allow ourselves to do." As they met Adrian and Pablo's gazes, I felt an icy sensation that I drew on my spine. There was no doubt. That night I planned to cross boundaries I had never crossed before. A slight trembling resorted to my hands. I felt my heart pounding so hard, it seemed its sound echoed to everyone around me. I doubted whether I was ready to face the situation. However, as I met my husband's gaze, there was something in his countenance that forced me to take a deep breath. Can you have faith in me? He whispered to me again. That simple sentence seemed to have the power to dispel all my doubts. I examined it thoroughly and in the end I agreed. Thus everything underwent a radical change. The tension that had pervaded the summons began to transform into something different. An atmosphere full of feeling with a look full of passion. I felt the touch of my husband's hands on my shoulders, gently touching me while Adrian and Pablo approached me little by little, as if they were waiting for an invitation that had already been sent to them. At first the situation was awkward, but it soon escalated. It was my husband who took control, setting the pace while the others kept going. Gradually any sign of hesitation vanished. It was the first time in my life that I experienced a sense of vulnerability and freedom at the same time. Adrian's hands rested on my waist while Paul stood nearby with a nervous, longing expression on his face. Intensity enveloped everything. My husband kept watching me with a smile of pride and contentment on his face. I watched as everything fell into place exactly as I had anticipated. As the night progressed, the boundaries that separated us completely disappeared. There was no room for shame, only desire, connection, and trust. It was an experience unlike anything I had ever experienced before. An experience that awakened in me a sense of vitality like no other. As everything in the room came to an end, tranquility returned. Adrian and Pablo sat comfortably on the couch, sharing glances that communicated emotions beyond what language could express. My husband took my hand and looked at me as if he needed to make sure I was okay. Everything went excellently. I nodded and smiled. Are you sure, Elena? Drania asked me as she pulled back a strand of hair from my face. Trust is the cornerstone of everything. Knowing that no matter what happens, we will be together. Even though there was still a lot to analyze, I managed to understand her message. That night not only transformed our connection, but also my perception of my husband, myself, and everything we thought we understood about love and trust. That night we crossed boundaries I would never have thought to cross. As the door closed behind Adrian and Paul, the home fell into a deep silence. The energy of the night was still present in the air. For a moment, we were both silent. I remained seated on the couch, still reflecting on what had happened, while he remained calm beside me. How are you feeling, Elena? He asked me, looking into my eyes. I felt calmly, but I was aware that my countenance showed a mixture of feelings difficult to express in words. What I am experiencing, I replied. At that moment my husband took the floor. What I wanted tonight went beyond a mere test, he said cautiously. He wished that we could understand a relevant aspect. That when we place sincere trust, we overcome fear. Trust allows us to overcome the barriers we create. The expressions he gave up began to give meaning to all the events of that night. At first it was inevitable that you would experience some discomfort. It was not possible to communicate this information to you in a different way, he said, noting my discomfort. However, during our conversation, it became clear that what happened was inexplicable through verbal communication. My husband's wish was that we could enjoy this experience together, experience it in our own emotions, only then could we understand the true meaning. That dialogue gave us the opportunity to meditate on our shared experiences. I realized that even though the unusual evening was an opportunity to develop as a couple and as people, sometimes the experiences we least expect are the ones that have the greatest impact on our personal growth. That night taught me a lesson. Sometimes the most surprising events motivate us to evolve, improve our communication, and strengthen our bonds in unexpected ways. Trust is more than just a word. It is an action.